We're learning scanf in C. We'll start off really easy by taking in a couple numbers with scanf, and then we'll take in some strings, which can be slightly harder, and we'll talk about a couple things that often go wrong when using scanf. One really quick thing I should mention from the last video is that in that video we made our main function without indicating a return type for it. Best practice is just to indicate an integer return type. And then at the end of your main function, you say return 0, and that just indicates that the execution got all the way to the end of your function. So wherever your program gets called from, your main function is just going to return the value of 0 to there, just to indicate that everything went okay. So I will do that in this video. We'll say int main and return 0. Now let's try using scanf right away, and Visual Studio is going to tell us that we can't do that. We'll say include stdio.h, since scanf is an input function, and then we'll say scanf %d for an integer. And we're going to try taking in an integer from the user and storing it inside of the variable b, which we'll declare right above scanf. We won't give it a value. We'll just say int b, and then its value will be scanned in from the user by scanf. And notice there's a little ampersand in front of the b in scanf. The ampersand is called the address of operator. So it just says take in the value scanned in by scanf and store it at the memory address of the variable b. So that just stores the value inside of b. Let's try and run this right now, and Visual Studio isn't going to let us. There are build errors, and the error is because of scanf. So there's a few things we can do so that Visual Studio doesn't get mad at us. One thing we can do is go to project, hit project 5 properties, or whatever the name of your project is, and then C/C++ general, and there's an option called SDL checks. On mine it's set to yes right now, so I'll change it to no. I'll hit OK, and then the next thing we're going to do is type define _CRT secure no warnings. This just says, hey, C runtime, I know that there can be some things that go wrong when you use scanf, so just don't give me the security warnings. I know that stuff can go wrong. Then it builds okay, but we still have one warning. It says return value ignored scanf, and it's underlined it in green for us. Scanf returns the number of successfully scanned in values. So if our scanf is successful, it's going to return a value of 1. And best practice is to write some code that in some way checks that the return value is what you would expect from scanf. So we'll say int return value, and we'll set that equal to whatever scanf returns. And then we'll just write if return value does not equal 1. Exclamation mark equals is does not equal. So if it does not equal 1, then execute the following line of code. We'll put printf, oh no, something went wrong. And then let's just print out the value of b that gets scanned in. Printf %d b. So if the return value isn't 1, if one value isn't successfully scanned in, then it's just going to print out, oh no, something went wrong. I'll put in 16, and it prints out 16 and exits with a code of 0. Let's run it again, and let's start putting the value a inside of the integer b, which isn't going to work because a is a character and b is an integer. So now we get, oh no, something went wrong, and it prints out a garbage value for b. We'll look at how to deal with this in a little bit of a better way after, but first let's just do some other stuff with scanf. Let's take in a double. We'll say double C, and then inside of scanf we'll go %lf, which is the format specifier for a double. And we'll say ampersand C to store that double in the address of the variable C. And let's also print out the value of the double inside of our printf. Let's run this and put in an integer and a double value. I'll say 16 and 33.3. And just to show that I can, I'll put a whole bunch of spaces before the 33.3. And this is going to work just fine. Scanf just skips any preceding white space before the double that it reads in. So 16 and 33 both get read in. It's still printing out the, oh no, something went wrong because we didn't change the return value to 2. since we now have two values being read in by scanf. I'll just run this again, go 1633.3, and this time we don't get the error message. Now let's read in a string, which is where scanf can start doing some weird stuff sometimes. Strings in C are just arrays of characters, so we'll go char string 1 will indicate that we want it to be 50 characters long. So our string is just a list of 50 characters. Let's make a separate scanf statement for the string after we print out the value of the integer and the double. Let's say return value 2 equals scanf, and this time we'll go %s, and we're going to store it inside of string 1. And notice we don't need the ampersand this time. So string 1 is actually already an address that points to the first element of our character array. So string 1 is an address that points to that first character. And I'll copy and paste our next 3 lines too, actually. So we'll go if return value does not equal 1, because we're reading in one string, then oh no, something went wrong. %s print out the characters inside of string 1. So we'll enter our integer and our double from before. They print out, and now we can enter a string, and it just gets printed to the screen. So this works just fine right now if we're only entering one word in. But if we try to enter 2 words, then it's actually only going to take in one of them. I'll put in my numbers and then say 2 words, and it's only going to take in 2. Because when scanf is reading in a string, when it gets to a white space, then it stops. So there's a few ways we can deal with taking in 2 words at a time. I'm going to look at how to do it using scanf. There are a few other functions that you could use to do it as well. We're just going to put some fancy code inside of our scanf here. We're going to say %bracket caret \n, which is the new line character, and then another bracket, %*c. What we've said here is taken all of the characters up until the next new line. So when the user hits enter, then a new line is entered, and scanf will go into the buffer and take all of the characters up to that new line. Let's run this right now and see what happens. We get, oh no, something went wrong, and then some weird stuff printing out to the console. So what's happening is that when the first scanf is executing, then we're getting some data left in the buffer. The buffer is just the area of memory where keyboard input goes and sits until you grab it from the buffer. So if the user types in 1633.3 and then hits enter, then the new line goes in the buffer automatically when enter gets hit. And then scanf is going in and taking the integer, and then it's taking the double, and then it's leaving the new line character in there. If you know Java, then you'll remember that the scanner class does this with lots of its methods. With next int and with next double, it'll leave the new line in there, and then it'll mess you up if you're taking in a string next. This is just the same thing happening. What we need to do is clear out this new line character from the buffer before we call scanf to read in our string. To do that, we'll write a while loop that is a little bit different than the while loop that we put in the first video. We're going to say while, and then a set of parentheses. And this time, instead of putting a body for our loop, we're just going to put a semicolon. And we're going to put the code for our loop inside of the condition for our loop. We'll say get char, which goes into the buffer and grabs a character. And we want it to keep grabbing characters until it grabs a new line, just in case there's anything else in there. Until it grabs the new line character, just keep grabbing everything. So that'll just clear out our buffer for us. So the buffer will be empty for when this second scanf gets called. Enter our numbers, and now it's actually waiting for us to input our string. Let's put in 3 words, and it grabs all of them, purple, green, and blue, and then exits with code 0. Now let's deal with any bad input in a little bit of a better way now. Instead of just saying if the return value isn't correct, then print out a message that something went wrong. Instead, we can put our scanf inside of a while loop. Let's say while return value equals our scanf does not equal 2. Then execute the following code, and we'll have more than 1 lines of code, so we'll have to make a body for the loop instead of just writing the code on the next line. We'll say printf not quite, try again. And then we'll clear out the buffer just to get rid of anything that's left in there. we'll say while a get char, just the same as we did before, does not equal the new line character. So now if we enter a bad value into the scanf, like trying to enter a character into here, then it'll print out not quite, try again, and then it'll clear that character out of the buffer, and then just try and execute the scanf again until it takes in an integer and a double successfully. And then we can put another set of parentheses around our scanf and our assignment to the return value variable, just to make sure that this part of our code executes before it tries comparing to 2. And putting parentheses around this section of code will just make sure that it executes before the rest of the code on that line. So if we run this now, then we can put in some bad input, and it's just going to let us keep trying until it scans in an integer and a double. And then if we put in an integer and a double, then it'll read those in, and then we can read our string in. And everything runs just fine now. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll put a lot of awesome resources in the description if anyone wants to check them out. Just some videos and some good books to read.